For your Zentangle project, you're going to have to show both principles of design, unity and movement, and then the elements of design, space and line. And incorporated in line is some shape in there. You've already learned about unity, you've already learned about line. Today we're going to be learning about movement and space. If you recall, the elements of design are the things that are seen in all artworks. So we've already seen in our mini Zentangles how we can use line and shape to create an artwork, but now we're going to add space into the mix. Space is the element of design that refers to the distance or area between, around, above, below, or within things. So anytime that you have a painting or a drawing and you want to create a scene where it looks like it's a realistic three-dimensional scene on a two-dimensional paper, you have to do certain things to actually make it seem realistic. So you can create space on a two-dimensional surface by doing one or a combination of these 5 things. The first one being color. As color recedes into the distance, your colors are going to become duller and bluer. So you'll want to remember this for whenever we do our landscape project at the end. These hills in the background are a lighter value and they're more blue in color than these green and darker colored hills that you're seeing in the foreground. Detail is also going to recede as objects get further into the distance. So notice these trees in the back, you can barely see the individual leaves on them. However, this tree that's closest to us, we can start seeing the individual foliage on the branches. You're also going to see overlapping shapes. So for instance, baby Jesus right here is in front of Mary. He's overlapping her. This guy in the front is overlapping this guy behind him. You can place objects higher up on the picture plane. So as objects recede, they get higher up on the picture. So for instance, this guy is the lower, he's the one closest to us. Then we have another man that's behind him and he's higher up. You'll notice Mary is higher up than that guy. The hills in the background are even higher up than Mary. And then lastly, size. So as objects move into the distance, they get smaller. So notice the height of this gentleman here in the front, and let's compare it to this guy over here on the right. Notice how much bigger this gentleman is compared to this gentleman on the right-hand side. After I explain how you can show movement in your artwork, I will show you guys how you can show space and movement together with your Zentangle. So remember, the way you arrange certain elements creates principles of design. In our Zentangle, we're already showing unity and harmony by drawing similar tangles, making sure they're either all geometric or all organic. But we're also going to try to show movement. And it's very common for artists to show more than one principle of design in an artwork. Now, movement is the principle of design that directs the viewer's eye throughout the work of art. To create movement in an artwork, you have to draw elements at an angle. So this painting done by Calabay, you'll notice that the bridge is a form and the top and bottom edges of the bridge are directing your eye towards this center of interest here of the people, but then they're shooting your eye back out by the walkway and the building on the left-hand side. So there is constant movement going on in that painting. Here we have koi fish, which are forms, and they are creating a diagonal movement through the work and that to the left. We have koi fish again. Notice that they're put on slight angles, but there's this wonderful downward movement that we're seeing here. But pay attention to how no koi fish is on a direct straight line. They're all placed on a slight angle. And then this one we have a drawing of curvilinear lines in which the artist chose to vary the lines by changing the length and the degree of curve that they're being drawn at. Your eye is moved throughout the entire composition on this little squiggly S that we're seeing here. And because those lines are constantly drawn, once again, on angles going in one consistent direction, your eye flows through the entire work. So that is going to be our goal for whenever you actually design your Zentangle drawing. You want to have the lines that you're drawing your tangles inside be drawn on angles. to show movement, and they should also overlap to show space. So leading lines are lines which lead people through a work, usually toward points of interest. In our case, we're just trying to get people to look through the entire work. So don't overdo it by directing every line to one particular point. Have your lines go through the entire piece. So if we take a second and look at this painting that was done by Claude Monet, you'll notice that the line curving around the beach, the line around the cliff, and then the line of these sailboats are leading your eye throughout the entire work. They're only using a few lines to draw the viewer's eye throughout the entire painting, and that's going to be our goal. You do not need 8 to 10 leading lines. Sometimes, as we saw in Morgan's work over here, how beautiful 2 simple leading lines can be. So in this regard, less can be more for our Zentangle project. So as we're looking at these Zentangles, I want you to notice how the leading lines match the tangles that are drawn within it. For instance, Dylan Crum chose to do a zigzag line for his leading line. They are all going in this downward direction. He's changing the angle of the zigzag to make it look more interesting. The tangles he's drawing inside it reflect the zigzag line itself. Notice that there are lots of triangular shapes that he's repeating throughout, and this helps unify the work together. In Jenny Roberts' work, she is varying her leading lines by having the width change as well as the angle in which she's drawing these curvilinear leading lines on. Even the tangles drawn inside these leading lines reflect the curvy leading line itself. Jesse Stumpka's work, he has this beautiful vertical movement that we're seeing, and that's emphasized by his leading lines changing their width from the top to the middle and then the middle to the bottom. That type of width change is really dynamic and helps draw the viewer's eye throughout the entire composition. One thing I want you to notice though is that no leading line is on a complete horizontal or vertical axis. Even though Sydney here is drawing her leading lines on a vertical axis, she's changing the width of those leading lines to where they flare out to give it a little bit more of an angle and movement throughout the work. These always remind me of stalactites in a cave, so she did a really good job on that one. And once again, look at the beauty and just doing 2 simple leading lines. You know, just having 2 lines that vary in width and overlap can create this beautiful, very serene look of movement. The last point I want to make is that all of these leading lines are filling up the pages. Notice how there is very little space left in between the leading lines. You're going to have to make sure that the leading lines that you draw fill at least 80% of the composition. So do not draw them to where they're so small that you will not have enough room to draw your tangles inside. So that's why I think, you know, drawing around 2 leading lines can be really good because then you can fit more tangles in. So in the colored folder that's placed within your portfolio, find the Zentangle Sketches packet. The project overview tells you that you have to depict the principles of design, unity, and movement in your Zentangle. Unity will be achieved by choosing organic or geometric tangles. Movement will be achieved by placing your leading lines on various angles that all go in one clear direction. You will also overlap your leading lines to create the element of design space. Leading lines are one of the most effective and underutilized compositional tools available to artists. Leading lines help you draw a viewer's attention to a specific part of the frame or throughout the entire work. Our eyes are naturally drawn along lines and paths in artworks. It's important to understand how to use leading lines effectively because if they are used incorrectly, they will be more detrimental than anything. So reference the images below to see how leading lines are used to carry your eye throughout the entire work. To create movement for your leading lines, separate your composition by drawing your leading lines at angles. Then you will be able to show movement more successfully. You have two paper options to choose from for this project. So those two pieces of paper, the long one and this rectangular one, are your final Zentangle papers. You can choose to draw your leading lines within the longer composition or the more rectangular composition. Whichever one you draw your sketches on, and that's the one you like, will determine which paper you will do your final project on. You have to draw at least 3 different compositions, choosing either size option. So once again, you can do size option 1 or the second one on this page. But in each sketch, you must show the following. Your leading lines must overlap to show space. Your leading lines must create movement by being placed on an angle. And your leading lines must fill up at least 80% of the composition. Today, you are not to draw tangles on these sketches. You're only drawing your leading lines. To begin, determine the direction you want the viewer's eye to look. So I want the viewer's eye to be drawn kind of in this direction throughout my work. You do not have to draw an arrow. I'm just showing you your thought process of what you should be doing. Next, you want to determine whether or not you're going to want to draw geometric or organic tangles in your Zentangle drawing. If you want to draw geometric tangles, then you're going to want to stick with zigzag or diagonal lines for your leading lines. If you want to do organic, you're going to want to stick with curvy lines. So I would like to do organic. So what I'm going to start doing, and I'm just going to erase this line just a little bit so it's not getting in my way. I am going to start drawing large leading lines that are varying in width and length. So here, I'm actually going to follow that initial line that I drew. But then I'm going to come in and I'm going to vary the width. Maybe have them get big again on the bottom. So there's one line. Now I have to draw a second one to have it overlap. I want my eye to still go in the similar direction. So I'm going to draw a second line that comes in and around. I'm going to have it go behind and then over top. So same thing again, I'm looking for ways that I can overlap my lines on top of one another. So there's the starting point of 2 leading lines drawing in a composition. Now I'm not filling 80% of the composition yet. I still have large gaps. So I'm going to have to come in and draw a third leading line, and maybe this one will go over top of this one, behind this one, and then through here. So now you can see that I'm filling up more space with my leading lines. Now I'm not really a fan of what I've drawn here yet. So I'm going to modify what I'm doing for the next one. If you like your first sketch, think about how you can modify it for the second one. So I liked my first curvilinear line, but for the second one, I wanted to add in a little bit more texture on the bottom by adding this kind of ripple effect. And I really enjoyed how that was looking. And I'm just adding more lines in until I got 80%. I really like that ripple effect, so I decided what would it look like if I did it on the top and bottom. So that's what you're seeing me do here. I'm just modifying my favorite design. Now your first idea is never actually your best idea, so keep working with your sketches to see what works best. And just make sure as you're doing it that these leading lines overlap, they create movement by being placed on an angle, and that these leading lines must fill up at least 80% of the composition. If they don't fill up 80% of the composition, either widen the leading lines you've already made or draw an extra making sure they also overlap with previous ones that you've done. A couple things that I want you to avoid. First one, do not just draw lines next to one another without the lines clearly overlapping. So that is an example of what not to do. Additionally, do not have your leading lines touch the edge of the composition. That adds a lot of really awful tension, and it's just not good composition techniques. Do not include two different types of lines, like don't include an organic and geometric line with one another. You also want to make sure that your lines are going in the same direction. As you can see, these curvy lines are going in opposite directions, so there's not a clear movement being seen. So do not also draw your lines on a vertical axis or horizontal axis. They need to be on a slight angle to show movement. Today, you need to draw at least 3 different compositions, choosing either size option, and in each sketch, you need to show leading lines that overlap. Leading lines must create movement by being placed on an angle, and your leading lines must fill up at least 80% of the composition. Please do not draw any tangles in these leading lines today. Good luck!